how do we see that? And I'm very glad that our event will be opened by the lecture of Professor Andrii Portnov. I'm sure that already now he will give some answers to my questions. Dr. Sinkevych will introduce Professor Portnov. Thank you very much.
Okay, I have very difficult task to introduce a person who doesn't need any introduction. But may I just remind you briefly Professor Portnov recent affiliations and awards. So currently Professor Portnov holds the chair of Intellectual History of Ukraine and European at the University of Viadrina, Frankfurt on Oder. And he's the director of the Viadrina Center of Polish and Ukrainian Studies, director of the Prisma Ukraina Research Network, and a member of the Ukrainian Pen Club. Recently, he got award the Dialogue Prize of German-Polish Society for his book Engagement in Sharing Knowledge about Ukraine. Its historical engagement in Europe. Actually, his publications are dedicated to the intellectual history, historiography, genocide, and memory studies in Central and Eastern Europe. Please, Professor Portnov, the floor is yours.
Доброго ранку. Good morning, dear colleagues. So, dear Yaroslav, dear Nataliia, thank you very much. And thank, of course, everybody, because as far as I understood, you've spent already a pretty tough previous conference, right? And now the next one. And for me, it's actually the same, because I've been to a very similar conference, mostly German language conference in Vienna, as well as some other colleagues, so we could somehow maybe share and combine those experiences. Now, what is my plan for today? My plan for today is, we'll see, maybe it was a wrong decision, you never know. My plan for today is to pay some attention to the history of, let's use this problematic term, Ukrainian studies, in German language space, in German universities. This history, in my view, is not properly known, unfortunately. It's very interesting, and I would even dare to say it could maybe somehow help us to explain and to understand what's going on now. Coming back to Benjamin's comment, I'm so sorry I've missed the entire talk, but I already feel like what was it about, and it's also very much like what concerns me, of course, and probably all of us. Okay, so I even decided to prepare some pictures for you, so it's like Saturday's morning, so you'll be kind of entertained. Oh, yeah, does it work? Very good. So, dear colleagues, that's the first German language history of Ukraine. A very interesting story indeed behind it. Yeah, so written by Johann Christian von Engel and published in Halle, where I've been yesterday, in the year of 1796. Yeah, so one could say right after the partitions of Poland, right? And still in late 18th century, as you see, Engel, even in his title, he conceptualized Ukraine as a history of Ukraine and Ukrainian Cossacks, which is very telling and interesting. So you have this like Cossack-Ukraine myth in it, right? And what's even more interesting, that this book was published in a series of German language books about so-called Weltgeschichte, so world history. And still you have like Ukrainian volume in it, yeah? And if you look for the next series of world history, then you publish like more or less like every 10-15 years, you'll see that there was no history of Ukraine anymore. So that was like the first and the last one, so to say, yeah? 1796. So later on, Ukraine was just considered to be Klein Rusland, so little Russia, part of Russia, yeah, stuff like that. And probably you immediately ask yourself, which I hope very much, like when the next German language history of Ukraine was published. We will come to this issue later, but I could give you the date already now. So the next German language history of Ukraine was published in the year 1939. So think about it. So the first German language history after the partitions of Poland, and the second right before the Second World War. So timing is, of course, perfect, but perfect in this sense. Good. Now, talking about German universities, there are several people of great prominence. For instance, those two guys here, Yaroslav Zhuravlov, who was the first professor of Slavic studies at the Friedrich Wilhelm University of Berlin in 1874. So here we're talking about late 19th century. And he also founded a very important journal called Archiv für Slavische Philologie, right? And another guy is Max Fassmann, also Berlin, also a professor at the University of Berlin, who is also founder of a new journal, Zeitschrift für Slavische Philologie, in the year 1924. Both guys paid attention to Ukrainian topics as well. So if you look carefully at both journals, you'll find, I wouldn't say a lot, but some publications about Ukrainian topics. Fassmann, for instance, he was a good friend and colleague of Dmytro Chizhevsky, among others, Dmytro Doroshenko, and other prominent Ukrainian scholars. But, of course, it would be too much, and that's not what I'm planning to do, to call, let's say, Yagit chair or Fassmann's chair, let's say, Ukrainian studies in kind of present-day sense of the word. It was Slavische Philologie. So it was within this idea of Slaventum, Slavistics, and stuff like that. And another very important, let's say, trend, which need to be mentioned, is, of course, the so-called Ostforschung, so the research of the East, right? And for instance, for Ostforschung, a very prominent person, also from Berlin, was this guy, Otto Hirsch, the professor for East European history in Berlin, from 1913, so right before the First World War. So here you have the cover of his book. The title could easily be read, Rusland. But in this book, which I recommend a lot, you have a chapter on Ukrainian question, which is very interesting indeed. So he tries to explain Ukrainian question in German before the First World War, which is still kind of, an interesting story. What is also important about this guy, Professor Hirsch, is that he was the supervisor of several doctoral dissertations on Ukrainian topics defended in Berlin in interwar years. I'll give you the titles later. So he is someone, again, who was, of course, first and foremost specialist in Russia and Russian history, but who included Ukrainian topics into his research, teaching, and so on. And it should be mentioned and noted. Okay, we are going pretty fast actually, I'm happy about it. Now, we have, of course, this guy, Mikhail Grushevsky, the most prominent Ukrainian historian, probably till nowadays. And I decided to show you the covers of his at least two German language publications, right? So that one is a very small, a popular one could say, yeah? The Ukrainian question in historical development. And it was actually published in the context of the First World War. So you see the publication date, it's Vienna, 1915. So it's not like just a book, it's like part of, let's call it open, like wartime propaganda and ideological struggle, for the future of Eastern Europe. And this one is a different story. That's a very interesting story because that's the first volume of Mikhail Grushevsky Historia Ukrainy Rusi, so the history of Ukraine Rus, published in German. And you see actually the German title is different. Again, it's fascinating. So again, in Ukrainian it's Historia Ukrainy Rusi. In German it's Geschichte des ukrainischen ruthenischen Volkes. Actually, the title is not bad because Grushevsky, as we all know, he was very much in favor of writing history as a history of people, folk, not state, not, something like that, but literally. So that is why he was properly called one of the prominent figures of so-called Narodnist historiography, so populist historiography in Ukraine. But what's interesting here, dear colleagues, first of all, it's interesting that Grushevsky already in 1894, so late 19th century, he got the chair, which was called the Chair for East European History, with Ruthenian language of teaching at the University of Lviv, Lemberg. No, actually, it was like It was mostly Polish language university when Hrushevsky came there. But again, he was supposed to teach in Ukrainian. Think about it, right? It's very interesting indeed. And actually, he started publishing his history of Ukraine Rus, also being a professor in Lviv, even though he himself was, of course, from, so he was a pupil of Vladimir Antonovich, so he came from Kiev, from the Russian Empire. And actually, it's interesting that when not just German translation, but also some other translations of his big history of Ukraine were like planned, yeah, the majority of them, for instance, the English language version was not even published at all. So the German language was published, but it was absolutely no success is a bad word here, no like real attention to the book. So you have a look at the date, I hope you could read it. It's Leipzig, 1906. Leipzig, 1906. The book has no commercial success at all, and no further volumes were translated. So you have only the first volume of Hrushevsky in German, and it played no real like, significant influence on the German historiography. Yeah, why so? We could discuss later on, because then we need the context of the early 20th century. Maybe it's not for the moment. What's important here again? So look, Hrushevsky was a professor in the Austrian Empire, but he was teaching in Ukrainian. So it's kind of again like a big question: how to categorize this type of history for kind of home use, so for Ukrainian-speaking people in Lviv. But after the events of the revolutions and wars, so 1970, 1921, we have an interesting developments in Germany itself, right? And of course, the most important one is this institution called Ukrainian Scientific Institute, Ukrainische Wissenschaftliche Institut in Berlin, established in the year 1926. Very interesting story behind it. So, on the one hand, Institute was linked to the group of people who came to Berlin as part of political emigration from Ukraine, more precisely from this interesting project of conservative Ukrainian state headed by Hetman Pavlo Skoropadsky. Skoropadsky himself gave some money to the institute, so it was started as a private initiative. Yeah, and the guy who was appointed director, he stands, let me show him, here, with a beautiful mustache, Dmytro Doroshenko, a prominent historian, but also a former minister of foreign affairs in Skoropadsky government. So it was like no coincidence. And Doroshenko in Ukrainian context is considered to be one of the prominent figures in so-called statist or statehood school of historiography. So if Hrushevsky paid attention to folk, people, social struggle, the guys like Doroshenko said, but we also need to talk about statehood tradition, about political history in elitist terms, Ukrainian elites, stuff like that. Now, it's interwar Berlin with all the complications in it, Weimar aside. So Doroshenko envisioned Institute as a small academy of sciences, and one of the most important parts of its activities was supposed to be, I'm quoting actually now, popularizing Ukrainian topics in German language context, university and broadly. So among other things, Institute had Ukrainian language courses in Berlin, also some public events in German, and let's not use a lot, but some publications in German. Like for instance, here you have 3 volumes published of the works of this Uni, and they were in German, so not in Ukrainian. So again, try to feel this difference. So if Hrushevsky was active in German language space, but in Ukrainian language, Uni Berlin tried to somehow influence the German language intellectual landscape, published their stuff in German, and what happened later on? So in the year of 1931, so 2 years before Hitler came to power, right? Institute got a state financial support from the German Ministry of Education, and since that it remained a state-sponsored institution. And of course, as you could imagine, in the Nazi time, with all the implications behind it. So again, created as a private initiative in 1926, but turned into state sponsored German institution in 1931. It existed until 1945 in Berlin, so until the very last days, and then the building was bombed, the library was completely destroyed, so like nowadays I could just tell you the address, but there is nothing left. So you have no building, no library, nothing. It's completely like wiped out. If you look back at those publications, very interesting stuff indeed. Very interesting stuff indeed. Like those Abhandlungen or here, so the spiritual life in Ukraine and stuff like that. You'll see that quite often you find there the same, like comparable topics or issues that we discuss nowadays. Like, for instance, should one start writing in German Kyiv instead of Kiev? Or whether Kievan Rus is the same as Kievan Rusland, and so on. So in this sense, it's like deja vu. You read Doroshenko from the 26th, and like, oh my God, it's like, it's like written 100 years afterwards. Now, again, Institute existed not, let me stress it again, not as a part of German university. So it was linked to the Berlin University. There were some lectures given like for the students, as I said, Ukrainian language courses, but still, this institute was not part of university per se. But we have examples, actually, I wouldn't say again like a lot, but some prominent examples of Ukrainians who made their academic careers, if one could use word career, in interwar Germany. For instance, by doing their dissertations, publishing their books, and trying to integrate into the German debate. Let me give you some concrete examples. Just two dissertations defended in Berlin. So the one by Domet Olyanshin is about Grigory Skovoroda. It might be difficult to read, but the date is 1925. And actually, when this dissertation and then book was published, it got very positive reviews in Soviet Ukraine, because it's the time of Ukrainization. Not like big repressions are just waiting to come. And for instance, Andrii Kovalevsky, a prominent Kharkiv scholar, he praised Olyanshin for his work on Skovoroda published in Berlin. Another example, even like more, let's say, interesting and forgotten, is Mikhail Antonovich, who defended his dissertation, as you see, on the German topic. So his dissertation was about Friedrich Ludwig Jahn and German nationalism, but he defended this stuff, and then he published numerous texts on Ukraine and Russian point, actually, in German language. And here, dear colleagues, pay attention again, maybe it's not perfectly seen here, but you see at the dissertations in the interwar period, you have here, it's not like that nowadays, here, you have a note where the guy comes from. It's always like that. And believe me, there are dissertations where you have like different definitions. And here, in case of Antonovich, is defended in 1933, so exactly before Hitler came to power. So it's written Mikhail Antonovich from Kyiv, Ukraine. So not Soviet Ukraine, not Soviet Union, but Kyiv, Ukraine. So he somehow managed to do that, even though it was like not, how to put it, like it was not like exactly the case, because he lived with his father, an emigrant scholar actually in Prague, and then moved to Berlin. But he deliberately used this definition, so that I am from Kyiv, Ukraine, and not from somewhere else. Okay, so that's like two examples, but let me give you more. For instance, the book by Vasil Kuchapsky, a very prominent West Ukrainian politician, military man, but also a philosopher. And a historian. And he published a book about West Ukraine in the times of revolution, so 1918, 1923, in Berlin in 1934. And actually, it's not the topic for today, but the personal story of Kuchapsky is incredible, because after the Second World War, imagine it, he lived in East Germany under a different name. So he lived like for decades in East Germany, pretending being a German guy. He was never arrested, so nothing happened to him. He started like, it's like, like a second wife, so to say. Yeah, so like he spent like first wife as Ukrainian, West Ukrainian, conservative political thinker and historian, and then as an East German engineer, I suppose, and he died peacefully in, like decades after the Second World War. The story of another person is not so peaceful, but still it's Oleg Olzhich or Oleg Kondiba, a prominent Ukrainian poet, and in his case, actually, it is correct to call him a nationalist because he himself described him as nationalist. He was the member of Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. But before the war, Oleg Kandyba defended dissertation on archaeology, Ukrainian archaeology in Germany. So it's about art and artifacts of Neolithic times. So, okay, maybe I have one more. This guy, again, another Ukrainian poet and a scholar, Yuri Kmen, Oswald Burkhardt. It's actually interesting because, look, first of all, he defended a dissertation on the Russian topic, which was like absolutely okay. So you see, like his topic was the leitmotifs of Leonid Andreev, this Russian exile writer. He did it in Münster, 1940, so right before the invasion of the Nazi Germany into the Soviet Union. And actually, he was forced to be a translator for the Wehrmacht. No surprise. But again, look, you see, when it came to Burkhardt, it is said that he is from Serbinovce, Russische Ukraine. So in this case, it's differently defined where he is from. So he was born in Romanian, right? And he was allowed to emigrate from Soviet Ukraine in 1931 as a German citizen, because he was a German citizen, like, imagine. So he was born as a German citizen and he remained German citizen until 1939 and he was allowed to immigrate. But again, you see what I'm trying to say here. I'm trying to say that in interval years, we have, let me carefully put it, tens of scholars from Ukraine and not only, defending their dissertations on Ukrainian or Ukraine-related topics at the German universities. So it was like part of the story, part of this interwar academic milieu. And of course, probably like the biggest, not the biggest, but a prominent part of the story was, of course, Dmytro Chizhevsky. It was Dmytro Chizhevsky who, let me remind you, he started teaching at the German university in Halle in the year of 1932. Again, right before Hitler came to power. So the story of Chizhevsky, and here we have an interesting story because that's a Festschrift for Chizhevsky, made by Max Fassmer. He was the editor of it and published in Berlin after the war, Berlin 1954. So Chizhevsky, he emigrated from Kyiv during the revolutionary years. He was in Prague. But he was a German language scholar, right? So, and he got this position in Halle in 1932, and actually this entire career of Chizhevsky is probably the longest career so far. So from 1932 until his death in the late 70s, his career in German universities, it was always, of course, not just about Ukraine. Let's be open about it. It was mostly about Russia and Bohemistic, so Bohemian and Slovak studies. Yeah, Chizhevsky, he was a kind of, nowadays it's hard to imagine for us anymore, but he was a kind of this like encyclopedic, like Slavist, yeah? So he did stuff on Poland, on Czech, on Slovak literatures and philosophers, and also on Germany and name it. But still, among many, many other things, he wrote one of the first histories of Ukrainian literature and history of Ukrainian philosophy. And now, dear colleagues, careful, none of those books was published in German. That's interests me until now, because again, those books were published in Ukrainian originally, then some of them translated into English, some translated also into other Slavic languages, but never into German. That's why until now we have no, please correct me if I'm wrong, until now we have no German language history of Ukrainian literature, which is really like unbelievable, because like Chizhevsky, he was the guy who physically spent the biggest part of his life in Germany. He wrote his history of Ukrainian literature in Germany, but it was published in Ukrainian and in English, and not in German. Good. Let's now come back to the next history of Ukraine. So after about 150 years, dear colleagues, after Engel, right, Boris Krupnitsky, so this guy, he published this book in the year 1939 in Leipzig again. Actually, it's even more like, history is very much about irony. So Krupnitsky defended his dissertation in Berlin about Engel. So Engel's Geschichte der ukrainischen Kosaken was the topic of Krupnitsky's PhD, And then he himself wrote the next history of Ukraine in 39. And this history, we have of course no time to go into detail. It was done according to, in his view, according to the approaches of this statist historical school. So in other words, it was history of Ukrainian statehood, yeah, fighting against Polish, Russian, Ottoman oppression, and mostly political history. And that's actually the problem we have till nowadays, that history of Ukraine is usually political. I'm not very happy about it, but it has kind of historical and political reasons behind it, of course. Now, let me show you something very important. During the Second World War, especially after the invasion into the Soviet Union, we have literally like tens of books in German language about Ukraine and Ukrainian-German relations. Like here, you have the book by Dmytro Antonovich, that's the father of Mikhail Antonovich, so the German impact on Ukrainian art. Andrii Yakovlev, you see the German law. The German law here means, of course, Magdeburgian law, right? And Dmytro Doroshenko, title which sounds a bit like scary to me, like that. So the Ukrainian das Reich. In fact, it's a kind of a catalogue of Ukrainian topics in German language, literature, historiography, cartography, whatsoever. But, dear colleagues, let us be frank about it. All those books published in 1941-43, especially after the war, they were kind of automatically, politically discredited by the fact and place of publication. Let's put it this way. So, my point would be like that. We do have some serious achievements in so-called Ukrainian studies in interwar period and especially like in the early 40s. But this political context, even if Doroshenko, for instance, he made no reference to, war, Reich, and so on, but still, the fact that the book was published in 42 made it like inevitable to treat it in the context of denazification and, the stuff like that. Now, what happened after the war, dear colleagues? Very important. So, first of all, as we all know, of course, Germany is divided now. You have East Germany and West Germany. And it has also implications in terms of teaching Slavic studies, publishing about it. And still, there are some like interesting, and I would maybe not say exceptions, but like interesting stories behind it. For instance, the story of this guy, Eduard Winter. Let me briefly remind you the story. So he was a professor of church history at the German University in Prague during the war, and he was the academic supervisor of Ivan Lysyak-Rudnitsky. So Lysyak-Rudnitsky career, as well as careers of almost all prominent, now we usually call like Ukrainian American, Ukrainian Canadian scholars of the old generation, they all started in Germany and in German language. And that's something that is missing in our perception of them. Lysyak-Rudnitsky, Pritsak, Yuri Ludsky, Bogdan Osechuk, and many, many others, they started as German language students and PhD students in Germany. The case of Lysyak-Rudnitsky, he defended his dissertation about Dragomanov in 1945, still in the German University in Prague. Think about it, it's very interesting. Now, what happened to this guy? This guy, Eduard Winter, decided to stay in East Germany and not to move to the West. So in the years 48-51, he was director of Martin Luther University at Halle. Later on, he was professor of East European history and director of the Institute of the History of Peoples of the USSR at the Humboldt University in Berlin. And look here, so this book is this very important book. Actually, it's if you like read Lysyak-Rudnitsky, he kind of his ideas of Ukraine between East and West, they were profoundly influenced by Winter's narrative. You see when it was published, 42. Byzantium and Rome in their struggle for Ukraine. An interesting title, actually. And it's amazingly how close Lysyak-Rudnitsky, even in the 70s, was to what Winter wrote in the 40s. But the next book is interesting, dear colleagues. Look there, it's 63, so it's East Berlin. And Eduard Winter, together with Alexander Bieletsky in Kiev, prepared a German language collection of Ivan Franko texts. You see, it's like a selected German language writings by Ivan Franko, and as we all know, Franko, he wrote in many languages. He wrote in German, in Polish, in Ukrainian, in Russian, so for him it was no problem at all. And here we are. But of course, West Germany kind of did more. Let me briefly remind you like another interesting person, Hans Koch, who was born in Lviv, who defended his dissertation on church history of Ukraine in Vienna in 1929, who before the Second World War was the director of Austro-Europe. You see the names, think about those names, they're the same nowadays. Austro-Europe Institute in Breslau, so in Wrocław, in Poland now, and after the war, director of the Austro-Europe Institute in Munich. And during the war, dear colleagues, he was a Nazi officer working for the Ministry of Occupied Territories. It's very typical. So Burkhardt was sent as a translator, and German professors, they worked for the Nazi regime. There were special delegations, for instance, sent to Dnipro to work in the archives, to everywhere, so like doing archaeological research. Still, Koch was a serious scholar, no doubt about it, and he deserves to be called a Ukrainianist. He made, for instance, this publication, the Anthology of Ukrainian Lyrics, and it was published in 1955. It's one of the best anthologies till nowadays. Okay, maybe to prove that he was not alone as a Nazi officer, two other books by prominent Nazi officers and good historians. Friedrich Heyer, The Orthodox Church in Ukraine in Modern Times. Heyer was a high-ranked Nazi officer in occupied Ukraine, personally involved also in killing people, torturing people. But again, it's like it's a different topic, maybe not for today. Karl Stumpf, a very important researcher of so-called German colonization of southern Russia. And for instance, this last book is largely based on archives stolen by the Nazi troops in Ukraine. And for instance, those archives are not, they disappeared. I have no time to go into details, but you could find quotes from the sources in Stumpf's book. He was also in Dnipro, in Zaporizhia, and everywhere there. But I think you already feel that this problem that people like Koch and Heyer and Stumpf, that they were so close linked to this Nazi experience, it was not very helpful strategically for Ukrainian studies. Stop at this point. What about Ukrainians? So before the war, we have Ukrainian Scientific Institute in Berlin. After the war, the biggest center was in Bavaria, in Munich. The Ukrainian Free University, first and foremost, again at first private, then took by the Bavarian ministry, as in the context of the Cold War, of course, in the context of the Cold War, no doubt about it. And what's interesting actually, here is one of the most, one of the biggest figures in this institution, a very interesting person in itself, Nataliia Sinkevych, and some of her books. But what I'm trying to say here, dear colleagues, despite the fact that we have some books like those two translated into German, in general, if we compare in terms of, let's say, even this, maybe not impact, but the idea of having impact on German language debate, we'll see that pre-Second World War Uni in Berlin was still, maybe not ideally, but kind of integrated into German language, debate. If you talk about UU after the war, it really was not, or maybe was not properly integrated. It was mostly in Ukrainian, mostly publications in Ukrainian, mostly for Ukrainians, so for the diaspora community, not for the German audience. And we could also remind ourselves about some earlier attempts, like for instance here, they are largely forgotten. For instance, the small brochure by Yuri Kosach on Ukrainian literature, or the anthology by Volodymyr Derzhavin, with an interesting title Gelb and Blau. But here, what's important? Here we have the stuff that was made literally in 3 to 4 years. So from 45 to 49. Because 49, especially even 48, is the year, and that's very important indeed, when the majority of Ukrainian scholars who moved to Bavaria, West Germany, during and after the war, we're talking about The numbers are like questionable, but it's like 100, maybe around 200,000 people. Not just all of them scholars, but scholars like among them. So the highest percentage of them moved further to overseas, to the US and Canada. So the year 48 is a starting point of a big migration, so the second wave. So from Germany to Canada and US. It also happened to, like, again, people like Lysiak Rudnitsky and Lutsky and Pritsak and many, many others. And what was left, for instance, let me just show you some like the last example here, probably like Yuri Boyko-Blokhin, who was at the UWU. He, for instance, co-edited those two books. One is about Shevchenko in German, another is about Lesya Ukrainka. So we have them, but it's just, how to call it, it's literally like something like very, very small if compared to like what we could expect after the war. You know, both books are very interesting indeed. So the one on Shevchenko is from the year 65, and the one on Lesya Ukrainka, it was prepared before but published in 94, so after the independence of Ukraine. So it took a lot of time. And we have, like, all the time we're talking about, we always have Dmytro Chizhevsky, like, here. So he's still alive, he lived a long life. After the war, he moved, of course, from Halle to Marburg and then Heidelberg, and he died in Heidelberg. Maybe two important things about Chizhevsky here again. So first of all, he never became a proper German professor and a German citizen. So he spent his entire life as a person with no passport and no proper professorship, even though he was called professor because of his, like, huge achievements and whatsoever. And this book is very interesting. I hope you could see it. It's his book about Skovoroda, published in German, but you see in the Harvard series of Ukrainian studies. So again, Chizhevsky is a good link between Germany and Harvard, because when Pritsak, like a younger friend of Chizhevsky, finally moved to the US and initiated this story we all know, like nowadays, Huri and so on. His connection with West Germany, and Chizhevsky was the one who found a publisher for the Harvard Ukrainian book series. So it's kind of, think about it. So the Harvard book series started in West Germany, not in the US. And it's always forgotten, and kind of, again, like, it's about the tradition of German Ukrainian studies. We even don't know if it existed. That's our big problem. You already see, like, one of the points here. Now, after all this story, like, about Doroshenko and Koch and Derzhava and Chizhevsky, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it became clear that actually in Germany, now United Germany, we have no Ukrainian studies, knowledge is very limited. There were two first histories of Ukraine, one this collective edited by Frank Grüner, published in 1903, the one by Andrii Portnov, first published 1994, and in the introduction to this 1994 book, Andrii Portnov, then professor in Cologne, wrote, let me quote him, "Until recently, Ukrainians were considered in Germany as Russians. Their language a Russian dialect, their history just part of Russian, Polish or Soviet history. The goal of my book is to counter the prevailing Russocentric lens which sees Ukraine, if at all, just as a periphery of Russia." Believe me, the very same quote could be found in the Doroshenko text from the late 20s, and I could say you more or less the same nowadays. That's where we are. Why, my biggest question is, why are we moving in those circles like all the time, and the same problems, of course? I'm calling them in a moment now. So-called Zeitenwende after February 24. I recently wrote a review, I'm not sure whether it will be published, because I'm still waiting for the response of the journal, about German language popular books about Ukraine after the full-scale invasion. There are books by the journalists, like this one and that one, but also some books like popular academic books, like Wendelin Zas's book, right, and some others. There are much more. I'll give you just 3 examples. I have like 15 titles in my review, and actually, if you read all those books carefully, you see something very interesting. Let me share that with you quickly, and I'm coming to an end actually. First of all the authors, they are trying to prove the same thing as Portnov just said, and Doroshenko, that it's not Russia, that it's not dialect, that, Second, it is all like historical parts are always arranged around two basic metaphors. One is nationalism, another one is victimhood. Nationalism and victimhood. So the entire Ukraine is between nationalism and victimhood. And nationalism was bad nationalism. That's clear. Not emancipatory, not like that. Only bad. And metaphorically, it's like that. You always have, especially journalists, they love bloodlines metaphor. They also have bloodlines. That's how we capture Ukraine. So yeah, in this sense, team is very successful. On the other hand, of course, you always have a big chapter on Bandera. You could have no mention of Lipinski, Dragoman. Who needs them? Who needs Doroshenko? Who needs Oswald Burgard? Of course, nobody. But Bandera should be there in a huge place. We could discuss it later on as well. I have some theory why this is always like it's a kind of rhetorical and methodological trap we're all getting into. And in this sense, this question of repeatedly doing the same work, it's really amazing. Actually, they also tries to employ Ukrainian names. Yeah, for instance, to write Kyiv instead of Kiev, but it's always difficult because usually Chernobyl remains Chernobyl. And for instance, like in Adler's book, you have Kharkiv, but Kiev. So it's like, it gives us the impression that Kharkiv is a Ukrainian city and Kiev is still a Russian one. So it's really like, it's very funny and very sad at the same time. Now, what do we have? I'm coming to my current state of the art. So at the university level of Ukrainian studies, we have my professorship, half paid, since 2018. We have Junior Professor Ukrainian Cultural Studies in Greifswald, which goes back actually pretty for a while. Alexander could tell the story better, but in Greifswald you have this attempts to establish Ukrainian studies, even using this category, Ukrainian studies, already in the 90s, even early 90s. Yeah, so it's not let's put it this way. So Greifswald could be politically traced back to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Vyadrina could be traced back to the Maidan and Crimea and Donbass war. And there are some initiatives that are very recent. I'll show you. Let me show it right now. So we have the German Ukrainian Historical Commission, right? Could be also traced back to the events on the Maidan. Then we have this project. Again, Victoria could tell you much more about it. The Virtual Ukrainian Institute for Advanced Studies, supported by Volkswagen Stiftung, will be opened soon officially in Berlin, early November. And we have our center. Actually, let me use this occasion to invite all of you, dear colleagues, if you have time and interest, on the last day of this autumn, it will be the November 30th, to the opening of Vyadrina Center of Polish and Ukrainian Studies. The difference of this center with the previous centers I've showed is that it is constructed as an integral part of the university. So it's not a project money, it's not Volkswagen or whatever, it's part of the university forever, as long as Vyadrina exists. Okay, how long it exists, we'll see. Now, what I would also like to tell you, if I may, very briefly, it is pretty clear, I already mentioned with this terrible Bandera stuff, it is pretty evident that there are enormous missing points when it comes to teaching and writing about Ukraine. My impression is that, first of all, we have a clear overemphasis on contemporary topics. So if one would look for good stuff on Ukraine's early modern history, medieval history, it would be not so easy to find. Second, we have, as I already said, this mega obsession with the nationalism. As Darius Stalunas recently said, we all spend so much time fighting methodological nationalism that maybe we became methodological imperialists. It's not my point. It's a Lithuanian historian who published his book in Moscow last year. Okay. What else? There are personalities who are completely absent, like I've mentioned some of them, Lipinski, Dragomanov, but list could be much bigger, also could be female, characters and stuff like that. So it should be all, in my view, it could be all reviewed and done differently. Let me also remind you that in German, unlike almost all other European languages, equal European languages, we have no translations of Ukrainian dissident literature. There is no Ivan Zuba internationalism or Russification in German. You could read it in, I've said it like last day in Vienna, you could read it in Ukrainian, Polish, Russian, French, Italian, but not German. Ask yourself why. Because, of course, Soviet Union was not a Russifying state. Clear. Yeah, it was actually an international state, right? That's what we're talking about. And that's why you have a link to all present-day talk about discrimination of Russian and Ukraine. Because if you see the Soviet Union as a multinational peaceful state, then you also analyze the entire post-Soviet condition very differently. Okay, now, coming back to visible changes. So I've showed you Historical Commission, the Virtual Institute, our small center. The real visible change, dear colleagues, as far as I could judge it, is the establishment of Ukrainian language courses at the universities. Because I could tell you even my personal experience, maybe I should have started from that. I'm in Germany since 2012. I'm not a Germanist, I just came here to finish my Dnipro book. So I remember very well how I went together with the Ukrainian ambassador to all Berlin universities asking for Ukrainian language courses after 2014. They all said, go home, we are not interested. They all rejected it. And now, after the February 24th, for instance, at the HAU, you have a full position, full unbefristete Stelle for Ukrainian language courses. So feel the difference. That's a big difference indeed. But it was paid by blood, let's be frank about it. And the same goes to this decision about Holodomor as a genocide. Because the same people who opposed it 2 years ago and make laugh of, everybody who was for it, now they're voting for. So I'm saying openly what I think. So yeah. Again, what we're talking about, it's not real systematic institutional changes on the university level. I am still asking myself, what about new professorships? In Vienna, we've heard that the community is against them. I could explain you why, dear colleagues, if you wish to. But what I'd like to stress here for our Ukrainian friends, because again, let's think about it responsibly, not just, yeah. Now, we have an unprecedented amount of Ukrainians in Germany. I deliberately compared the numbers. We know the numbers. How many refugees were in interwar period, after the Second World War, and now. So in interwar period, we're talking about around 100,000 people in Germany. After the war, 200,000, and now it's more than a million. And in this million, we have thousands of scholars, right? Mostly having short-term fellowships. And I know, guys, that a lot of you are hoping for permanent positions, something like that. You will not get them. That's what I want to tell you, very frankly. And don't believe those who tell you you will. There is no interest and no desire to do that. Why I'm stressing that? Because let us responsibly ask ourselves what could be done. Because Doroshenko viewed this Uni Institute as a small academy of sciences, and it was really small, like 10 people first. Now we're talking about hundreds, thousands of people, and I see no real initiatives around it. Everybody just tries to survive, to find a good German professor who would give him or her something for a short time period. So try to feel this difference again. On the other hand, dear colleagues, again, if you look back at the post-Second World War situation, you see that Ukrainian Free University, it existed outside the German academia. Outside. It was not part of it. A real part. Not indeed. Now, all of you are still, even if for a short-term period, you are inside this academia. You are inside all those universities, all around it. Starting from Frankfurt Oder on one border up to Münster on the other border. That's something very new and unprecedented. And who knows what happened? Maybe out of it, we'll have a new like set of connections, networks, whatever, between Germany and Ukraine, especially after the war and so on. Maybe we have only bigger problems and disappointments and social injustice and stuff like that. But let's be frank about it. So the situation is really like unusual, and the German foundations, as you probably know, some of them even made it officially, they are having less and less money. Not just for you, for everything. Less and less. There are cuts. So that's a very serious problem. How to deal with those people, how to include them, and how to. So I hope you feel this point here. And secondly, and that would be probably the last, as one Russian scholar, whom I quoted in Vienna, wrote a year ago in a very interesting forum. Actually, if you have a chance, please read it in the NMO journal. A forum called Humanities After February 24. It's fascinating. You have also German voices there. Of course, no Ukrainians, but you have German, American, Russian, name it, different voices. And one of the Russian scholars working in the US, he said, now we have a conjunctural, a temporary pretension of interest in Ukraine. It will continue for some months and then it will stop. And when it will stop, now I'm quoting Mikhail Yampolsky, great scholar actually, very good scholar, cinema and stuff like that. And when it stopped, we should create something new, like something new than Russian studies, and new than Ukrainian studies, or something like really like trends. And I've said it in here, and I may say it here, okay, very nice. The question is how you do it. And in order to do that, do you need to learn Ukrainian first? Do you need to read Lipinsky first? Or maybe you could just do it like that. Say, yeah, we stopped with this high national attitude. We just started something new. I'm afraid the second what will happen. So we are living in a very dynamic, difficult, and tragic times. And I think we should be aware of it. And we should also be aware of all those attempts I've mentioned earlier in German language and in Germany that unfortunately, like viewing from our today's perspective, brought very, very little. Thank you very much.
As you can see, we have 3 chairs on the podium because we want to arrange this discussion in form of a fishbowl, which means you want to ask a question, you don't have to raise your hand and ask for permission. You just go to the podium, take a seat and ask your question, and leave the podium as soon as you're done with the question. So you don't occupy the third seat for the next 50 minutes, just leave when you're done with the question. And please do not destroy our arrangement with cameras here in the middle, which means for the chair that the chair loses a part of the power, but we hope that it will work better than the classical discussion. So Kira, I would ask you to move this chair now. Okay.
Okay, let's start. The floor is open.
Maybe just go to the floor and ask a question. Like,
Yeah.
okay.
It's very new.
I remain here. There are 2 chairs, dear colleagues.
You are the main fish. So
I'll stay here, so yeah, don't worry.
Andrii, thank you so much. I have a very maybe question, like simple, but it seems to me that you are quite critical about the very term Ukrainian studies. Maybe it's just impression and it's wrong, but still, I have a question. What is or what are Ukrainian studies for you, and how you treat this term, and maybe you have synonyms, like something to replace this very term?
Yeah, should I immediately reply? Okay, it would be, of course, nicer to think a little bit.
If there is another fish who would like to ask a question, just please go to the podium and ask your question.
So I promise to respond, indeed, because that's an important question. I'm just thinking how to make it as short as possible and not to give like another talk. Maybe Annette will help me, and then I somehow...
Maybe I ask you another question so you can think about both on the same time. The quote from Yampolsky, I think it's very interesting. If I'm looking at my colleagues from German studies or English studies or maybe or French studies, they all have the same approach to smaller nations and smaller entities of research at a university, like Ukrainian studies or Yiddish studies. They're talking a lot about transcending the national, going into global, going into, you could say, overnational studies or supranational studies. We have a lot of terminology to make this kind of thing, and it comes out always from the big disciplines. And I think we have a lack of terminology for thinking about nations, also societies of smaller, not in the sense of quality, even not on quantity, because we have a lot of Ukrainians, but in the sense of understudied and undervalued nations. And I think it's a very big issue why a lot of German studies scholars write all these books about transcultural studies. They have one language, and they're on the forefront of making theory about transnational studies, and they're only speaking about migrants who are writing books in German, you could say. So I think we don't have the terminology, and I know that we're also thinking about it. Why this kind of transnational studies? It's always the avant-garde, and people are thinking to make something new after a century of lack of description are kind of nationalists and that was a question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, actually, Annette, you helped me indeed. Thank you so much. It was not planned, but actually it was exactly, dear Svetlana, what I was trying to tell you. Because you see, personally, I have no problems with many categories, Ukrainian studies for sure. But what I'm trying to provocative to stress here, that especially in Germany, and that is why I also paid attention to the titles even before the First World War of professorships. This field of actually how to call our field now. You see, usually we could say Russian and East European studies. Or as our friends in Imperial said, North Eurasian studies, right? Or post-Soviet, and now all those terms, they're discredited. So like this region, like for Ostforschung, it was designed, it still is designed, in a kind of formerly non-national terms. Again, Svetlana, try to feel this difference. Whether you have a professorship in, let's say, Russian history, whether you have in East European history. So if it's East European, it's kind of, it's East European. It's supranational. It's like post-national world. Actually, in this respect, dear colleagues, read carefully, I think it's amazing, read carefully this so-called Habermas debate. So what Habermas wrote about Ukraine, and how some scholars like Jan Behrens, friend of us, responded to him. Because this exactly this logic that we have kind of a post-national, constitutionalist society, whatever, and then why should we go back to nationalist categories? So, in other words, Ukrainian studies sounds nationalistic. The title of my professorship sounds still nationalistic, even though it has entanglement which makes it like less. Yeah? And if you have East European history, it sounds great, even though de facto it's Russian imperial history, but it's okay. That's about fashion and cultural perception. That is why I've tried to stress that maybe, I don't know, dear colleagues, maybe we should kind of think how this field of research could be defined and conceptualized in a new way. Because when we are just saying like, we need more Ukrainian studies in Germany, first reaction would be, so you want to go back to national history, or you want to bring your nationalistic history to us Germans? We don't need it. And I said, no. Actually, I've heard this last week again from my Viadrina colleague. It was openly said to me. Again, so it's the same now, it doesn't matter. It was like 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or yesterday. I say, no, actually, I'm trying to show you all those possibilities. Like look at Burckhardt. He was also a Russian poet. He was a German poet. He made such an interesting, for instance, analysis of Gumilev and so on. It's like, and it doesn't work. So in other words, that is why for like this kind of struggle, for instance, Ukrainian embassy tries to have and to convince to have more Ukrainian studies. It should be considered that in Germany, in German language space, we have this different categorization existing field, and maybe some different names and whatsoever needed. Even though, and here again, coming back to what Aneta said, there is always a danger if you just say, I'm very much for that. It's like, maybe if I may make a personal example, like my Dnipro book. For me, it's not just Ukrainian studies. It is also Jewish studies, Russian studies, Soviet studies, name it. So I've made the title. I'm sorry for kind of promoting it. I'm really, just to make it, now you'll see the point. I called it an integral history for European city. But it was published in a book series of Ukrainian studies. Okay? You see it. So it was still categorized in this way. And I was not very happy about it. And that's what we should be all the time aware. And if we stop using this category Ukrainian in the title, then one could say, Russian is enough. Mm-hmm. Of course, Russian is enough. German is enough. You see, so in other words, to keep this Ukrainian aspect, you need this name, but to make it really attractive, fashionable, and non-Western, it should be called somewhere else. I would say it's a kind of a trap, metaphorical, even methodological trap for all of us.
But it's because the terminology and the timeline, how modernity is perceived, how development of nations and supranations is perceived. It's like doing Jewish studies or Ukrainian studies it's like bringing all the wagon of terminology and development we imagine ourselves back, you could say, and they're going backwards. And it's also a very interesting time frame. It's like this kind of...
Very good. So, using this category, Ukrainians, you're kind of going backwards.
Yeah, provincializing, our colleagues in the forum has now a convention about area studies provincializing once again. That's the imagining we have. So I'm fishful.
I think it's the next set of fish.
Set of fish, okay.
Also, you join.
Yeah, probably. Okay.
Yeah, Andrii, thank you very much for this excursion into the history of Ukrainian studies in the German language space. It was in many ways kind of very revealing and one thing, also what you said, but I think something that you did not say explicitly, but for me it was almost like the underlying kind of thought that the Ukrainian studies in Germany in the 20th century was like a part of this fallout after the next historical disaster which happened on the Ukrainian territory. And since my question is about the role of the Ukrainian state. Since 30 years, Ukraine is a state. Did it change anything? And maybe even I kind of reflected on this last wave of academic emigration. We kind of following the same, same kind of trap, because we go to other countries and the only thing we want from Ukraine that they let us go and keep us maybe 10% of our position in our home universities. We are ready to deliver lists of publications, but the only thing we wanted from Ukraine that we are free to go, to travel. And so is it going to change?
Okay. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much, dear Tatiana. So, Ukrainian state, I already told this story. I think it's not like a secret one. It was not a secret. Now it doesn't matter anymore. But unfortunately, the real possibilities, for instance, for cultural diplomacy, let's say, of Ukrainian embassies and institutions, it's usually limited to asking for. As I said, like we visited the director of the Humboldt University, me and ambassador, and we asked, maybe some Ukrainian lady. I said no. I said thank you very much. Choose. That was that. Of course, it's not a real role of the state. That's first. Second, I think that the very fact of existence of Ukrainian state still, of course, plays a role, because this argument saying that until 1991 there was no Ukrainian state, it is used from time to time to say, but what do you want? What do you expect, like in West Germany in the 60s? You were not a state, just part of the Soviet Union, so you should be happy. Look, Franco book, it's enough. So in this sense, it plays a role. On the other hand, what really amazes me, and not just me, like believe me, like again, yesterday we were on the panel with Klaus Gestfeld, he said exactly the same. So if you're given any interview, and I'm unfortunately like forced to do that from time to time to a German journalist, you always have the same set of questions about Ukraine. Of course, Bandera, of course, corruption, of course, Russian language, but as a kind of a, like the biggest issue would always be like that. Actually, but tell me, like frankly, like, is there like Ukrainian nation finally? Does it exist? Does it exist? And you have this, as one of our colleagues put it, you have this like narrative of non-existent nation with a very strong nationalism. That's what Ukraine is. And nowadays, as we all know, Ukraine has no money for cultural projects and cultural politics. And that is very sad, of course. And I would also maybe say that, how to put it, like we are underestimating, I'm afraid, often the consequences of the war, our education system and academic system. It is already destroyed. It would be destroyed even further. And nobody knows what to do. And nobody really cares about it. I mean, now Ukrainian politicians and government and those guys, and that's almost hopeless, I would say.
Thank you, Andrii, for formulating the problem, but I also think it over about depending on Ukrainian studies or subject now from the current political situation and some kind of, so to say, trends which can disappear or the interest could be lost. But we also talked yesterday about, probably, to my opinion, there are two main directions of the solution of this problem, probably more, but two main, I guess. One of them is, of course, the creation of stable structures, also positions, center, research center, and so on, structures like this. But it's also important, and we discussed it yesterday, first including the Ukrainian Eastern European history in the generally European history of the subject as an integral part of it. And the second one, also this interdisciplinary approach, and our colleagues from Peace and Conflict Studies were very active, and of course the Ukrainian case will stay in the conflict studies, I guess, for a long time, because it's shaping of the European peace situation after the after-war period for the first time. So I mean, with it, we should probably to put the Ukrainian subject just as an integrative part in different research projects, big issues, and so on. I mean, yes, also Jewish studies can concern East European Jews and interconnections to Ukraine and so on. There are many different possibilities in different ways, and it's possible actually to do it generally in Eastern European studies, and you meant the Ukrainian subjects all over Germany up to Munich, and the example of Professor Vulpus, who was here yesterday. She combines both Russian and Ukrainian subjects, especially if we speak about pre-modern time. It's actually interconnected, it's entangled. Let's use always all the possibilities. My guess the structures are German sciences a bit conservative, so we cannot expect that Ukrainian studies tours can appear in all the universities, but we could actually use different possibilities to put Ukrainian issues to different levels and forms of research field.
Yes, you could, and you should. I mean, not you like you, but like all of us. What we are hoping to do, but again, believe me, dear colleagues, it's not easy, but that's a challenge. I like, of course, challenges, so like I'm not like saying that I'm sad about it. But our challenge now, seriously, at the Viadrina, is to try to build entangled Polish and Ukrainian studies. Because again, it sounds like pretty obvious, like neighbor countries, right, and so on. But in fact, when it comes like to very practical issues, like to find a scholar who would be able to more or less freely operate in Polish, Ukrainian, and German language, you immediately have a big problem. And that's kind of, strange, because of course for our colleagues from the interview period, it was natural, they could all, of course, switch between the languages, but nowadays, in our global world, we are not. It's actually interesting to think about it, Why it's so? And we don't try to do that, because again, I would say that on the methodological level, Polish studies, they have, of course, the same problem. Of course, it's also national, it's small, right? It's sometimes looks not very modern, and so on. And who knows? Maybe in this case, like Ukrainian aspects could somehow improve it. Of course, again, me myself, I'm not thinking of myself as a historian in a purely let's say those nationally grouped categories. Really not. But when we start talking about Ukrainian studies, Polish studies, it looks like that, and that's also kind of an interesting situation for all of us. And at one point, but it was some years ago, I should admit, I've tried to look just for fun into existing different global or transnational histories of Europe or the world, published in German or in English, and actually to find where Ukraine is mentioned, like in this huge Osterhammel book and other books. Believe me, dear colleagues, that was how to call it?
Sobering experience.
Yeah, something like that. So let's change it. Sure.
Yes, actually, it's very much the direction of what you just said. I think I would not be quite as pessimistic, because we don't only need institutional change, we also need cultural change of what is expected of historians of Eastern Europe, or with which kind of regional focuses you are successful as a historian of Eastern Europe. And I think this is already beginning to change. I mean, I wouldn't say that every chair for Eastern European history is people there are only doing Russian imperial history with a strong kind of imperial mindset. I mean, of course, you would find examples, and I also wouldn't be naive about that there will be also an institutional, and it's already started, a backlash against this whole appeal to decolonize Eastern Europe, because it's also about resources, it's about money, and of course there will be backlash from those who have built quite a career with this very Russian imperial focus in their studies. But I don't think you can say that for all of the people, and it's already beginning to change that chairs for Eastern European history, people who get these chairs have done very serious work on Ukrainian history. So maybe we should also not only think about institutions and how can we build. And it's very much going back to what was just said, but to liberate ourselves from from this idea of if you want to have a chair for Eastern European history, at least one book has to be about Russia. So this kind of idea should be carried. But I think if we build our own networks, if we build, if we maybe this is idealistic, but if we build our networks, if we do just good research and manage to communicate why Ukrainian history is an important part of European history, that could also be a strategy. Because Yaroslav was saying, we don't want just the problems, we also want ideas for solutions.
I never said about all, so maybe it sounded differently, dear Francisca, but I've never said we have no time. We could analyze, if you wish, in detail every German professorships on East European studies.
That would be interesting.
Believe me, I'm ready to do that, but I never said that all of them are like that, okay? That's first one. Let me be clear about it, because otherwise you're like accusing me of something that, please, I'm accused every day in many things, and I'm really I'm a bit tired of it. And that's actually also interesting about German debate, that in German debate, you as a Ukrainian voice should always somehow excuse yourself, explain, I'm not a nationalist, I'm not against Russian studies, I'm not, and you know that. But you see, I'm saying it again. I'm very unhappy about it, really. And I also don't like this term pessimistic, because pessimistic, it's kind of, emotional or whatever. It's not a methodological approach. What I've tried to do, I've tried to show some tendencies, problems. Maybe it was not, of course, precise and exact and so on. But I think that optimism, pessimism, it's not about research, it's not about analysis, it's not about even planning the future. I think that we should be first and foremost, as much as possible, rational and realistic. That's my biggest, let's say, advice to all of us. And just stop pretend that it's like that or that. Really, I hope you know that even better than me, what I'm talking here about. So,
but would you not say, Andrii, that something has already changed in the last years?
No, I've said already. So we have Ukrainian language courses. We have those institutions that are now supposed to open. We have conferences like that. We have a lot of people who came here and who sometimes are teaching, sometimes doing research. We have German professors who started giving seminars on Ukrainian topics and so on. And now it's okay, now you could speculate whether it's enough, whether it's just the first step, whether it's already the end of the beginning. Because what my feeling is that this desire or this shock of the February 24th, when I remember also very well how I was not allowed even to use the term war, because when I said war in Ukraine, you immediately you discredited yourself. I remember that, because as I said, I'm here since 2012. I remember all those debates. I also remember what people said, the same people, okay? So if you look back at all that and ask ourselves whether those kind of changes, whether they are stable, sustainable, Ukrainian language courses at the HAU, yes, they are. Even if no student, they will still exist, because they will be this position, securely paid. Whether all those seminars for one semester and those short-term grants are sustainable, my answer would be probably no. And I don't want to pretend that I'm happy that they are here. I'm not happy. I'm not happy. And I also don't see in Germany, I'm sorry for that, but I don't see in German language, let's say, academic milieu, enough critical attitude toward these dominant Russian and Soviet studies. Because dear colleagues, I just came back from Geneva. I'm giving a big lecture in Geneva. And I've met Georges Niva. You probably know him. Georges Niva, the biggest Swiss, French, Russian specialist, personal friend of Solzhenitsyn, and many, many others. And you know what Georges Niva did? Georges Niva, I'm actually not going to say that, but you kind of provoked me. Georges Niva published a big article about his mistakes, where he said, I was wrong about Solzhenitsyn, I was wrong about, and the list of it. Even though, dear colleagues, Georges Niva already in early 90s published stuff about Ukraine. There is a book about Ukraine made by him and some Ukrainian authors in 1994. Do we have people like Georges Niva in Germany? I like it as an question mark.
Yeah, two short remarks. One actually adds to Franziska's statement. I still think, Benjamin, you pointed that out yesterday as well, that this German approach of having professorships in East European history still provides, I think, all possibilities to focus in different areas, and this I see it skeptically. I see a lot of lacks. I would agree in that, but still, I think. I mean, if you tell what is Russian imperial history is the history of a city in imperial Ukraine. Or Imperial Russia, which was part of the Ukraine, would that be Russian imperial history? I mean, it depends of the approaches you do. It depends of the sources you. So, sorry, but your view is a bit oversimplified to me, and that's not really. So you have really to look how people are working and not put all in a few frames. And my second question is, I really enjoyed listening to your overview, but what should be Ukrainian studies actually about? Is it about the country? Is it about the language and culture? What about Jewish history in Ukraine? Is that part of Ukrainian studies? What about Germans, Russians, Armenians, Greek, and all other minorities? I have no idea what Ukrainian studies includes, what it excludes. I mean, that should be also talk about. And actually, I would like to hear more about that, and not what is not there, but what is actually the content of this.
Thank you for being so frank. I am kind of, collecting characteristics about myself. I was recently called exile historic, and now I'm oversimplified. Thanks a lot. Now, what Ukrainian studies are? I'm afraid I would never dare to say something like that to my German colleagues, but okay, that's where my Ukrainian voice is different.
No, I
sorry. Now let me finish, please. Now, about Ukrainian studies. Of course, you're right. Again, I've made a kind of an overview which was designed, maybe in a wrong way, in a hope that some of you will start looking for those books because they're forgotten, they're not read. And that was my main motivation, not to do something else, indeed. And to show you the richness of the tradition that is lost. It's also lost in Ukraine as well. They are not quoted because the knowledge of German is not good enough. And that's again kind of maybe a hope for those people who would come back here. You might read my book about Dnipro, if you have time, and you'll see how we're dealing with Ukrainian studies, how we're dealing with Jewish history, with Russian history. So I'm not just going to tell it again. But I'm of course amazed by this comment. But okay, I'm kind of used to it because I could also compare this attitude to me as a scholar in Germany to attitude to me as a scholar in the U.S., in Britain, in Switzerland, in France, and in this comparison, German looks very bad. I'm sorry for that. Or maybe I look bad here. Maybe I don't fit into this context. Now, what about Ukrainian studies? That's one of the reasons why I several times made this point, as Svetlana noticed, that's a big question that should be addressed, and it's not so obvious at all. And it's actually, you may also read, for instance, what Marina Mogilna wrote about Russian studies to see that it's not just Ukrainian fascists who think the same. But this debate was ongoing in the interwar period, and it goes on now. For instance, Jan Pritsak, whom I mentioned here, and who was a professor of Theology in Hamburg after the Second World War, before he went to Harvard, he made a very clear point that Ukrainian studies are not about ethnic Ukrainians or Ukrainian statehoods, but, for him at least, about every cultural, political process of the territory of contemporary Ukraine. So in other words, we have this territorial approach to it. At the same time, with this territorial approach, we should not kind of forget this aspect of the language and culture and so on. And there are, of course, different competing notions of what makes some person or some text Ukrainian, the same as I hope it is about what makes some text person German or Polish or Jewish. And I think it should be discussed also nowadays again and again. But Ukrainian studies are not about Ukraine and Ukrainian ethnic community. That's for sure for me.
May I interrupt the official, and because I have questions connected with that Frank said. You know, Andrii, we have been talking about it several times. Wouldn't it be better? I mean, wouldn't it be worse to give the interest in the topics Krupnitsky and Chizhevsky were interested about? I mean, about early modern times, about the period when Ukrainians studied at German universities and they had their formation and intellectual background. Do you see some perspective in early modern stuff?
I see. Every topic has a perspective, that's for sure. Question is, what do you need to do a proper early modern studies? You need even more languages, right? And the knowledge of the context. And you also, as I said, you see this focus on contemporary topics, which is pretty sad. For instance, I was very happy that one of the latest conferences by German Ukrainian Historical Commission, it was about 18th century. So let's hope that the next one would be about 17th century and then 16th century, and then maybe medieval times. Whether this, let's say, temporal switch will help us to somehow get rid of those, let's say, stereotypes, usually ascribed to Ukraine in contemporary era, I don't know. Maybe also. At the same time, it's also clear that when we're talking about like early modern or medieval period, it is no less difficult and problematic to find proper methodology, right, and language to define terminology also, right, to speak about it. It's actually interesting. I would say it's a kind of a philosophical issue, because when Hrushevsky, for instance, published his Historia Ukrainской Rusi, he said that he appealed to historians in Kiev and Lviv. He appealed for them to do more modern history, because everybody was doing, medieval. And when we read it nowadays, it was said like 100 years ago. When we read it nowadays, it sounds so strange, because how could you appeal to do more recent history? He said, like, look, we need more about Kulish, about Romanov, and less maybe about the chronicles. So history always, let me put it this way, Natalia, history always responds to contemporary situation. Because we have also this relation between our current position and problems and what we are looking for in the past. And that is why to expect the real... To expect this big rise of, let's say, non-modern history, we need a kind of a reason, social reason, financial reason, maybe some reason from nowadays that would somehow provoke it. And then who knows, maybe, we never know actually, no, historians, they do not know the future. It's like we could just point out some issues.
Thank you, Natalia.
So I actually very like to be part of the discussion, and what I really see and believe, I do believe in international collaboration and in networking, but from my perspective, what is needed is this interdisciplinary approach to research, but also inter-institutional collaboration within Germany, but also in the international context and also with Ukraine. So yesterday we also talked, it was mentioned, Francisca, by you, so we have the same topics all over again and all over again, and actually your speech is very much resonated with the idea that I tried to convey yesterday. Mm-hmm. So through this due, I believe, to this Cold War, Ukrainian research was completely excluded, and Ukrainians as scientists and actually all post-Soviet room, and it was discussed about the topics without these scholars. And what I see now, I work in international collaboration, especially with the focus on Eastern Europe, that the scientists in Ukraine, but in the whole post-Soviet countries, they do not know which topics are now researched on, and they research may be different. They don't have access to the literature very often because it's all everything connected to money and funding. And so in this European landscape is actually topics are set somehow also so influenced by the funding which is available. So what I tried to convey yesterday, so we have these scholars now, but how to integrate them? I really believe what is needed is graduate school that is actually on maybe national, international level with the focus. It should, the terminology should be defined. Is it a regional studies? It is whatever. But what actually is the debate on the local level in German society? For example, that's everywhere. So lots of discussion about heritage language. And no one wants in Germany to hear about heritage language. So now it is this focus on multilingualism. And I think here a like comprehensive approach is needed, because if the school system in Germany will allow this multilingualism and a possibility to learn different languages at school level already, then you'll have lots of students who will be fluent in 3 or more languages for all this research. At the same time, I think it is maybe, in my perspective, a Soviet-like view that we need to go to the state and state should promote our ideas. Actually, university, they are autonomous entities that survived different statehood transformations, as you may say and see. So I think it is important to discuss and how it is to include also the voices of the scientists into the discourse, but also look beyond. If we talk about Ukrainian literature in Germany, there were lots of translations. They were published in various local periodicals. They existed for several years, and it's not somehow no one knows where to look for. That is why everyone starts from the very beginning. And I think that is the message that I'm taking for myself from this conference and the last 2 days, that more and more communication is needed. And of course, the topics should, I also believe, not focus on some nations, but on the society. Maybe that's my sociological point. So my question is, do you believe that like a doctoral school, like umbrella, and then you where you have co-tutels with scholars and scientists from maybe even different countries, would help in this situation?
Well, I could tell you as a kind of a comment, if you wish, and that's actually what I was thinking after our Vienna conference, because for me it was interesting, that in this Vienna conference, almost every talk was about so decolonial, post-colonial, whatever approach to Ukraine. Actually, they stood very differently, but As far as I understand, at least, the writings of the classics of post-colonialism, that are actually, let me remind it, very strongly anti-Western, anti-American. The point is that those subaltern groups and peoples, in this case, let's say Ukrainians, whatever it means, are supposed to finally speak the language of their own, meaning not Ukrainian, but the language of concepts and attitudes of their own, and not to reproduce the imposed narrative. Yeah, in some sense. So for the fathers of post-colonial thought, it was, of course, the narrative of the West, but in case of Ukraine, let's say it was the narrative of Russia. Now, what is the problem with it? The problem is that, actually, and you said about it, that when we are thinking about, and we use in terms like integration, right, of Ukrainian scholars or topics, whatever, into existing, let's say, Western or German academia, yeah? Usually, the price of this integration is the full acceptance of the language and categories instant and dominant in this German academia. In other words, how could you do this post-colonial thing? There is no way to do it. You could do it in your own language, nobody cares about it, and it remains local knowledge. Or, in order to integrate yourself, especially in Germany, as you just heard, you should completely, especially if you are a foreigner, especially if you have this migrant background, you should completely, entirely, make it fully compatible with the existing master narrative. And actually, Francisca, think about how many professors of Eastern European history in Germany have migrant background, and how many of them has no German education and no German PhD. Think about it seriously, because I've been treated now as a kind of, someone who should excuse myself. I'm not going to excuse myself. I'm probably the only one. I have no German education, no German PhD.
There's one more in Constance.
One more in Constance. Very good. Who is that?
Pavel Kolář. PhD in Prague.
PhD in Prague. So I should excuse myself again. But that's the real problem, seriously, because it's very easy to say, let's integrate, let's make a school where Habermas will come and tell us how to think about it. Yeah, we could do that. We have a lot of those Habermases here. But if we are doing that, it's like up to us. Let's make a choice. I'm not saying about myself, about the community, which is non-existent probably now. Whether we want to integrate ourselves into German or any other context, or we want to really, seriously follow this post-colonial rhetoric suggested by prominent Ukrainian intellectuals. And I'm afraid a lot of people, they're even not aware of this contradiction. And that's a big problem, I would say, fundamental problem, methodological, theoretical, and whatsoever. Because if you start given not just the topics, but the descriptions of some events that are completely new for the dominant German narrative about it, nobody will listen to you. Nobody will listen to you. And here you have, again, that's a big fundamental issue behind it. And it's not present in the debate, as far as I see it.
Andrea, but if it's what you tell, so there should be two, scientists who might have very different perspective on one topic.
You see, academic hierarchies, that's a very big and important issue. I remember Polish debate about post-colonialism, very interesting actually debate, much more interesting than Ukrainian one. So far, we'll see, maybe now it will develop better, yeah? Because that's my problem, apparently, that I constantly read in local languages as well, not just English and German. And I remember the point made by, if I'm not mistaken, Dariusz Skorzewski. He said that it's actually the price we should pay to be present in this global post-colonial studies. We should forget our Polish voice, and we should speak the same way as they speak. And then we're what to do about it? And there is no answer. So we'll see. Maybe Ukrainians will find an answer. Who knows?
Thank you. Please, Benjamin.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrii, for your really great talk, and I learned a lot, and I will definitely look up many of the books that you have mentioned, because I think this was quite eye-opening. And I also, I think, agree with like 95% of your observations. But I would, but I have like two comments. First of all, I completely agree with your like critical assessment that like those scholars who currently are either in Germany or in Switzerland or in Austria and have like short-time fellowships and have like temporal funding, I think they should not have any illusions about permanent positions. And I think it is very important that you made this point, because at another occasion I almost say the same thing, and just to, I mean, as you said, to be rational and not to be like to stick to some illusions. And I think this has to be said again and again. So don't have these illusions that this money would be continuous, and because universities work in a different way. And this would, but what would this imply? This would imply not to wait for these Western institutions to do something for you, because this will be a big disillusionment.
That's right.
And we have talked a lot about agency and a lot about Ukrainians demanding for granting agency. But talking about agency means also of like accepting the role of being an agent, not waiting for Western universities to do something for these people, but to unite, to join forces. And you have given two great examples of Ukrainians being in exile and becoming active and building institutions. And by building institutions, being stronger than before, than depending on other institutions who won't do anything. And I completely agree with you. And I think you are the expert in this field, because you have been fighting for so long for these positions, for this funding, and so on and so on. And we have been, able to see your achievements in Frankfurt, and I think these are great achievements. But again, we know that how difficult it was and how difficult it still is. So I think this could be taken as a lesson, not to wait for the president of the Humboldt University and to grant like a tiny money for funding of language classes in Ukrainian, and to see this as a big achievement. And because in the big picture, it's not a big, these are not big achievements. Sure. But I think, so this would be my first point, not to wait, but to think about possibilities that you have, like as well, I'm not talking to you, but especially to scholars who came from Ukraine to us and are here as guest studies, to use this historical unique opportunity and to take as much as possible from structural funding, from temporal funding, and to use this opportunity to join forces and to think about institution building in this very situation. And this is an historical moment. This historical moment will disappear. We have to be realistic. This is, either it happens now, or it doesn't happen at all. So, and I think, and don't wait. Don't wait for others to do what you're expecting them to do. So leave this box of being like, of waiting for the others to do something for you, but start uniting with them. So this would be my first point. And the second point is about strategy. So, because I think I think all of us in the room are completely agree with where do we want to get. I think we all have like common goals. So I think it's not, so this would be like a tiny critique to what I've heard from you. It's very much about strategy. What do we get if we start in our tiny group, if we start starting a polemic with journalists who are who are on our side? Sabine Adler, Steffen Dobbert, Silvia Sasse. You have, and I think you will have to be very cautious. They are fighting for our cause. And I think we have to be very cautious of being like overcritical with like polemicizing with their work and saying, well, they all say the same. They all talk only about Bandera. They all talk about corruption, about nationalism. If this is the case, they might do it for purpose. They might do it for purpose because they address a certain general German audience, which would expect answers to certain questions that are on the floor in the German debate. So I think just from a strategic point of view, we should not destroy our alliances. We should keep in mind that we have common goals and that we should see that there are people like fighting on different fronts to reach the same goal. So I would make a strong plea, because we are all frustrated and we are all rather pessimistic concerning this closing window of opportunity. But let's fight at a different front. So let's not polemicize against each other, but see where we have like these common interests and where we can work together, as my colleague has just said, thinking about like coalitions inside Germany, outside Germany, international, with cultural diplomacy from Kiev, and think about possible coalitions that could be useful. And I think this would be very important. I think these are not so much questions, but like comments.
Thank you for these notions. Thank you so much. I'm very sorry to interrupt this interesting and very hot and fruitful discussion, but we still have one more session. And please allow me, Professor Portnov, to say thank you. Despite of your very busy graphic, you found the time to have this talk here, and we are very thankful. It was crucial for us to have you here, and you know, because you are the unique professor of Ukrainian history in Germany. So I thank you so much.